Father President, I present for the degree of Doctor of Public Administration, honoris causa, him who the university has approved, General Michael V. Hayden.
In 1989, as the Berlin Wall fell, historian Francis Fukuyama declared that with the end of the Cold War, the end of history had come. He wasn't one of our history majors, that's for sure. He could not have been more wrong. The end of the Cold War brought not an end of history, but the beginning of a far different chapter in world history, a chapter much more dangerous and much more unstable than anything America's Cold Warriors had known. Throughout this chapter, which has yet to close, America's political and military leaders have had the task not only of keeping America safe, but also of protecting the very ideals upon which America was founded. Helping America stay true to herself was and is no easy task, but it was a task that General Michael Hayden bore with great fortitude. As a U.S. Air Force officer, director of the National Security Agency, chief of the Central Security Service, principal deputy director of National Intelligence, and finally, as the director of the CIA, General Hayden has devoted his life to keeping America safe, strong, and free. In that work, he has drawn time and again on his Catholic faith, working to integrate a Catholic understanding of liberty, justice, and human dignity into the day-to-day operations of America's military and intelligence operations. Because he has spent many sleepless nights, Americans can sleep in their beds secure. For his faithful service to his country and his church, Franciscan University is proud to declare General Michael V. Hayden, Doctor of Public Administration, honoris causa.
Wow, well, thank you for that wonderful honor, and really, thank you for the chance to be back in the Ohio Valley, among family, among friends, back to roots, to be back where black and gold, I know, are naturally occurring colors. Okay? That's an automatic applause line in this area. Father Terry, Father Nick, members of the Board of Trustees, the Board of Advisors, thanks so much for inviting me to be here. Now, class of 2012, it's great to be with you here today and to be with those who made today possible, your friends, your family, your teachers. So don't forget to thank them before the day is out. You know, the last commencement address I gave was a little over 3 years ago. It was for graduates of CIA's Field Operations course. That's where we train our covert operators. That's the public name for spies, okay? It was a lot smaller crowd than this one, and we didn't have any graduation pictures. And neither did we have the family and friends that you have here today that could share in the excitement and joy of that moment. So again, you treasure their being here with you today, and again, thank them deeply. Now, I sat kind of where you are about 40 miles east of here in Pittsburgh, 45 years ago, graduating from Duquesne University. So get a little perspective here, all right? Think of yourself here giving this speech in the year 2057, and you'll have an idea how I feel. By the way, I have no idea who my graduation speaker was, so I won't feel too bad if in a half a century you have trouble recalling my name too. But I do hope that you remember at least a few of the things I'm going to share with you, because frankly, I think you'll find what I have to say here today very consistent with the ideas, the values, the lessons you picked up here in Steubenville. And I hope what I say is useful to you, because frankly, as tough as working through university life was, life is really going to come at you pretty fast now. Let me just give you an example of my own case. 2 years after I left Duquesne, I was planning B-52 strikes over Vietnam, and the best football player in my high school football team up at North Catholic in Pittsburgh had already been killed in Vietnam. 15 years after I left Duquesne, I was a military attaché living in a communist country. 20 years after graduation, I was working in the White House when the Berlin Wall came down. And 30 years, at the 30-year point, I was appointed to head the National Security Agency, an organization I hadn't even known existed when I was a student. Now look, your personal trajectory is going to be different, but I think I can guarantee you it's going to be no less exciting, no less meaningful, no less rewarding. So buckle up. You're going to be in for a very exciting ride. And I guess I'd also offer you the advice, don't over-worry it. You're ready. You're ready for this. You're ready because you've been well prepared. You've been well prepared by your families, and you're the product of an educational tradition that actually goes back to the great universities of medieval Europe, the bodies of learning that shaped Western civilization. Steeped as you are now in the Catholic liberal arts tradition, you're well equipped for the world as you're going to find it. After all, you're coming from an institution that accurately describes itself as academically excellent, passionately Catholic. So with that in mind, with that as backdrop, let me emphasize just a couple of things that I suspect, or at least hope, have become part of you while you have been studying here. First, I believe you now have some sense of how everything is actually connected to everything else. Several years ago, I was officiating at a retirement ceremony. It was for an American military officer, but we were doing it in Great Britain, in England. We were doing it at a place called Ripon. And Ripon Cathedral, it's about 100 miles north of London, is a magnificent structure. It's 1,300 years old. It has gone through 2 civil wars, and if you walk through the cathedral, you can still see the damage from Cromwell's time. And there was a banner. There's a banner hanging in the church, and as I'm up there, kind of like this for the ceremony, and I'm looking out, the banner, I just thought to myself, boy, that looks like the flag of the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. Now, the history majors among you might know that the flag of the District of Columbia is actually the coat of arms of George Washington's family. Well, guess what? That was the coat of arms of George Washington's family. I was actually in the ancestral home county of the Washingtons. And it just struck me. Here I was, 3,000 miles and 3 centuries away from Washington, and there I was witnessing connective tissue. During the war in Yugoslavia in the mid-90s, I was the intelligence chief for U.S. forces in Europe. And in that capacity, I paid a visit to Belgrade in the former Yugoslavia, and I was there to visit a fellow named Branko Kirga. He was then head of intelligence for the Yugoslav army. Now, it should go without saying that Branko and I had some issues. Technically, neither the United States nor Yugoslavia were involved in the war in neighboring Bosnia, but we both knew that we were, and we were on different sides. So I enter Bronco's office. He rushes out from behind his desk, and I figured, oh, here it comes. I figure he's about to launch into some angry lecture at me. No. He had something different. He looked at me, and turns out that Branko Kirga, head of intelligence for the Yugoslavian People's Army, Branko Kirga's grandfather had been a steel worker in Pittsburgh. Just as my father had been a welder, and at that moment we may as well have been cousins, all right? Again, a connection where none was expected. I mentioned earlier, describing my trajectory, that I had been a military attaché to a Warsaw Pact country during the Cold War. And part of that job, when you're there, it's actually talking to the opposition. So one night, my wife Janine and I were having dinner. We're having dinner with officers from Greece, from the Soviet Union, which still existed then, Bulgaria, and communist East Germany. And Janine and I were actually late for dinner because it was December 8th, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, and we had to go to Mass that evening because of the Holy Day. Now, our Greek hosts, we told them, they graciously held dinner for us, but when we arrived, everyone else had been kind of waiting around, so when we arrived, we felt obliged to explain to the other guests, remember, all of them from communist countries, why we had been delayed. And I had just started the explanation when the East German, communist East Germany, a colonel there named Roland Wunder, I'm saying December 8th, Immaculate Conception, and all of a sudden he just starts nodding and going, yeah, the Feast of Mary, December 8th. Turns out my communist counterpart had been an altar boy in West Germany before his family had migrated to the East after the war looking for work. And as we walked into the dining room, we were two military officers, one an American, one an East German, and we were reciting from memory and aloud the opening prayers of the Mass. Et intro ibo ad altare Dei. I will go to the altar of God. Connection. Look, in the kinds of jobs I've had, I've met a lot of people. Hamid Karzai, president of Afghanistan, Ashfaq Kayani, chief of army staff, the most powerful man in Pakistan, King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia. In my old line of work, in the world of intelligence, you take people pretty much the way you find them, pretty much the way God made them. Back in the 90s, there was a John Sayles film called Lone Star. It was about a Texas border town, and my wife and I really liked it because we were living in Texas at the time. But Lone Star is kind of an odd Western. It's a Western where there aren't simple white hats and black hats. In fact, one character has to explain to another that there actually isn't a border between the good people and the bad people. Don't you think it's a little bit odd that my life experience as an intelligence officer has kind of brought me full circle, I think, to some of the truths you learned here and I learned at Duquesne. We're all connected. Most people try to do the right thing, that we're all God's creatures, that we all deserve one another's respect. And permit me just one more example of how I think this should work. Remember that assignment in Bulgaria I was describing to you? Well, during that assignment, we crossed the border one weekend and went to the town of Edirne in Turkey. Now, Bulgaria was communist but nominally Christian. Turkey's Muslim. And as you cross the border and you start driving towards the city of Edirne, the skyline is just filled with the minarets of 100 mosques. And we were the guests of a Turkish brigadier general, an old friend, who was the garrison commander of the tank brigade there in Edirne. And after a wonderful Turkish dinner, he took us out to see the sights, and we visited the town's largest mosque. Actually, it's the largest mosque in Europe outside of Istanbul. And as we're approaching the mosque, it was quite a scene as my wife Janine and our daughter Margaret were hurriedly pulling out garments to cover their heads and to cover their arms, all the while insisting that they had to respect the Muslim tradition before we entered the mosque. And at the same time, our Turkish friend was equally insisting that we were Christians and that the ladies covering themselves was absolutely unnecessary. We're all connected. We all deserve one another's respect, and if you'll want me to just state it one more time, a bit more theologically, we're all part of the same body. So that's the first truth. Even when it's not immediately obvious, everything is connected to everything else. Now there's a second truth. I think it's equally basic, it's equally important. There are some things that are true even if no one else believes them, even if no one else accepts them. Facts are facts, truths are truths. Now, I learned in philosophy class, and I'm sure you did too, that people are entitled to their own opinion. They're not, however, entitled to their own facts. There's a wonderful story from our own history. John Adams, our second president, is remembered for a famous statement during the trial after the Boston Massacre, where he had the unpopular task of defending British soldiers and facing up to the prejudices and emotions of the moment. He reminded everyone that, quote, facts are stubborn things. I can still remember the title of a colonial era pamphlet that I had to read for an American history class. The title, Parliament Cannot Make 2 and 2 equal 5. History tells us that truth eventually wins out. Martin Luther King once said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But for that arc to bend towards justice, good people have to stand their ground. And so even while recognizing that all of us are connected, all of us deserve respect, we have to acknowledge facts. We have to recognize moral realities. We have to recognize truths. Truths like life begins at conception, and that in a free society, I have the right to act consistent with that belief, free from the coercion of my own government. Truths like my religious freedom is something given to me by God, not by my government, and not something that can be controlled or doled out by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I got more. Truths, like most of us, can trace our presence here to this great country, to the decisions of ancestors, to risk all, to leave all, for a life in which basic beliefs can not only be held, but openly expressed and actively lived. Benjamin Franklin was asked at the end of the Constitutional Convention in 1787, well, doctor, what have we got? A republic or a monarchy? Franklin responded, a republic, if you can keep it. So I'm afraid that Mr. Franklin and folks like me are leaving folks like you with a few challenges. Sorry about that. I'm tempted to say, welcome to the big leagues. But remember, as I began, you've got the tool to deal with these challenges. And as I've tried to suggest, foremost among these tools is what you've developed here, a strong faith. Don't stray too far or too long from it. Now, I've tried not to. I think I've got more fingers than I can remember Sundays where I didn't actually make it to Mass. And the misses were actually pretty tough. One of those Sundays I was in Sarajevo, Bosnia, during the war on a bitterly cold night in January with the city under siege and the threat of sniper fire in the air. So if you're sleeping in some Sunday morning and you're wondering whether or not you should go to Mass, if there are not snipers in your neighborhood, now, this getting the Mass thing, by the way, isn't bragging. It's just an admission that I know I need the help. Given the kind of life my wife and our family have lived, we've heard Mass in a variety of languages: American English, British English, German, French, Spanish, Italian, Gaelic, Greek, Bulgarian, Polish, Czech, Hungarian, Arabic, Serbian, Croatian, Korean, Chinese, Chamorro, Tagalog, Japanese, Russian. You were taught it's a universal church, right? For me, the most memorable Mass may have been on a really hot day in August a few years ago in Baghdad. It was 117 degrees Fahrenheit that afternoon. I was director of CIA at the time. I was visiting our station, the CIA station in the Green Zone. And as you might imagine, with no apologies, our discussions and our planning on that Saturday, they were about hard things. That afternoon, I helicoptered south to a town called Hilla. I actually got to fly over the Tower of Babel between Baghdad and Hilla. And then we returned to the Green Zone that evening just in time so I could run to anticipated Mass. The chapel was a double-wide trailer, and I went right from the helipad in my sweat-soaked, we call them BDUs, battle dress uniform, the camouflage dress you've seen, in my sweat-soaked BDUs, still wearing my sidearm, and my extra clips of ammo, and a holster that was slung over my shoulders. Now, these BDUs, these battle dress uniforms, they have a stitched name tag on them. So as I went up to communion, the lay Eucharistic minister, who I'd never met before and whom I have never seen since, he could see 4 stars, and he could see the name Hayden. And I guess he recognized me because as he held the host in front of me, he simply said, "Michael, the body of Christ." Not General, Michael. Hot trailer, war zone, Kevlar vests, armed men and women in what we call battle rattle, the body of Christ, the peace of the Lord. Now, talk about a sacramental moment. All of us need sacramental moments, since, as I said earlier, life's going to come at you pretty fast now. It will bring you increased responsibilities, and it will be a rare day when you will have a legitimate choice to stand by and do nothing. Responsibility usually demands action. You will need the courage to act, the audacity to stand your ground. Shortly after 9/11, those of us who were in the intelligence business, we were looking for a few phrases, almost literally bumper stickers, or images that we could use to kind of focus the anger and dedication of our workforces. I was director of NSA, the National Security Agency at the time, and when I went over to CIA, I saw that they literally had bumper stickers plastered all over their headquarters. And on the bumper stickers, they were quite stark and simple, was the rallying cry of Todd Beamer and the other heroes on Flight 93. It just said, "Let's roll," which was a perfect phrase for CIA because they need to go forward in order to do their work. Now, NSA, where I was, the National Security Agency, we're a little different. We do that electronic thing. We don't actually have to go forward to do our stuff. Given modern electronics, we could do a lot of our work at home station. So I'm thinking, what should be our equivalent rallying cry? Some of you may remember the Friday after 9/11, all the networks carried this big benefit concert with all the big stars you'd recognize. And in the midst of that show, my wife Janine and I were watching it, in the midst of that show, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, they played their signature song, "I Won't Back Down." And about halfway through the song, my wife turned to me and said, "There you go." So that song was heard throughout the halls of the National Security Agency for the next 5 years. Okay? Not a bad song, I will tell you. It's a pretty good one to run to, too. Okay? And a really good thought: don't back down. When it comes time to do that, to stand your ground, don't forget to use the moral compass you've been given here at the Franciscan University. Things can sometimes seem complicated, but let me share a secret with you, something I learned over the years. I found that as I became more senior in government, as I advanced to positions of greater responsibility, I was actually relying less on any professional expertise I had developed and was relying more on the values and the lessons I had learned from my parents and I had learned in Catholic grade school. And you have had those basic truths reinforced by the challenging philosophy and theology courses you've had here. These are wonderful gifts, and they are gifts that will keep on giving. They've given you an anchor in what will from time to time be a turbulent sea. They will give you a compass when the way ahead is far from clear. They will give you a beam of light when all seems shadow. Take heart. I sense that you all will do very well. I've been blessed with a wonderful life, but frankly, I envy your future. And one more note, if any of you do actually give that a commencement address in 2057, feel free to use any of this. I won't need it anymore. Thank you. Congratulations.